in the metaphysical realm or in the magical realm, however you want to put it, the language is emotions. This thing could see right through me, like it saw everything about me, the good and the bad, and there was no hiding. Howdy, guys. We are here to talk about psychedelic story time. I'm very experienced with Psilocybe cubensis, which is the typical magic mushroom that you see on the streets. Most people, when they're talking about tripping on mushrooms, they're talking about Psilocybe cubensis. Now, this story is about a totally different species called Psilocybe Natalensis. It looks a little bit different. It's more white overall. They're about 2 times the strength of most cubensis strains. And after having tried them my first time on what I would have thought was a low dose, it was not a low dose. My first attempt with these was 1.75 grams. So 1.75 grams on Natalensis, is equal to roughly 3.5 grams of cubensis. But I would say the experience I had was far beyond that amount of cubensis. So anyways, let's get into the actual story. So a few days ago, I took these, and for legal purposes, we're going to forefront this story with the concept that this is just for entertainment. I didn't actually take these for legal reasons, now that we've got our bases covered. Now, these come on a little bit faster than cubensis also. I would say with cubensis, it can be anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour and 20 minutes before you start kind of ramping up and feeling the effects. You'll start getting like butterflies in your tummy, almost like you feel like something big's about to happen. It's almost like anxiety or excitement. With these, I had a little bit of that, like normal, but they came on quicker within about 30 to 45 minutes, I feel like. And they come on gentler in a way. I didn't have as much anxiety or excitement, but I did have a bit of it. They also have less edge to them, like less nausea. Now, I took enough that it was potent enough that I still felt some body heaviness and a little bit of nausea, but it wasn't as bad as cubensis usually are for me. I will say they made my stomach extremely filled with like pressure and gas, which always happens with cubensis. After taking them and kind of waiting a bit, I knew it was about time for them to hit, so I started to get cozy and lay in my bed, which I always do, and turn on I have a special psychedelic playlist. And it wasn't very long before I just started getting imagery in my mind. Very clear though, like on other psychedelics, like even on cubensis mushrooms, you don't really get vivid high resolution imagery. You get fractals, you might see the walls in your room kind of wobbling or looking like water. The most I've ever had on those was mental imagery that was very fractal and colorful. Like it was definitely vivid at times, but it wasn't like vivid and specific. It was more abstract fractal shapes, like sacred geometry, that kind of thing. But on these, the imagery is very distinct and crisp. It's like you type something into AI and your brain is showing you the most high resolution, hyper realistic version of that, which I've never had on anything. So maybe once I've had something similar to that on LSD. So this type of imagery is new to me. I've never experienced this. Even on DMT, it generally just superimposes a lot of geometry and high-res abstract stuff on whatever I'm looking at. Or I'll just completely black out and not even remember what I experienced half the time on that. So this was something beyond what I've ever experienced, because I could consciously remember a lot of it, which is why I'm able to show you guys what I saw. So as I was fading into the trip during a song that was somewhat relaxing, which I'm going to play for you guys in a minute, I started seeing, as I'm laying there, I'm feeling almost like a jet of heat energy, like orange it didn't feel necessarily hot, but in my mind I could see that it was hot. It was like, to me, it was like when a rocket is re-entering the atmosphere and it starts heating up, or even a meteorite, anything entering Earth's atmosphere, it gets hot because of the friction, and it's almost like jets of heat are blasting around the front of it as it pushes through the atmosphere. And it was like those jets of heat, all that heat was like hitting me, and coming off of me were like cinders like this. So like these beams of light hitting this guy on the top right, it was like that, like they were coming at me, hitting me. And then these cinders coming off the body here, it was like that. And on this guy, it's sort of like sparks flying off of him. It was like that. I was like laying on the bed, but my spiritual body was like in some sort of galactic void or space, and all of this celestial stuff is around me, and then this heat was hitting me, seeming to come from nowhere. And as that was happening, I started seeing the image of these winged, etheric but orange, just like the cinders that were hitting me. They were like human tribal men. They weren't really wearing much clothes, like their chests was naked, I remember that. But you also couldn't see them clearly, like these two left pictures, or even this top right one. They didn't have, their details weren't visible like that. They were more like this lower middle image where it's almost like etheric. Like they're almost like translucent, but with glowing outlines all over. And the wings weren't, I don't think, part of them. They were part of the costume they were wearing, but they were actually flying or hovering. They would sort of be like, they were like running and flapping the wings symbolically as a dance, as they were like trotting around almost. So it was definitely like almost ceremonial in a way, and symbolic of an eagle flying or some other type of bird flying. It seemed to be an eagle, but it was playful. And when I play the song for you, I can kind of explain how they were hovering. But there was about 5 of them, and the one in the middle first, as they sort of swooped in to my conscious sight, like in my mind's eye, one of them said, "We've got another one, guys," or "We've got another one, boys," or something. And then they, without actually speaking it, I could feel that they were offering for me to go on some sort of lesson with them, or to let them take me along for some sort of ride. And they also kept saying, come on. Like the sense that I got was they were urging me to get up and move, to kind of shake off bad energy and to start dancing, which sometimes on mushrooms I'll do that, but it's usually a more sensual thing. Like almost always on psychedelics, I turn it into a bit of a sexual thing. And I've had spiritual moments where it was like my higher self was like, come on, like rolling its eyes, like, are you gonna waste this, potential to learn something spiritual on just, being sexual all night for like 8 hours or something? Because there are a few times where I would do things like that, and then at the end of it, I've worn myself out and I've gained nothing, no spiritual knowledge. I've just kind of turned it into hedonistic pleasure for way too long, like for hours. And so there are times where my inner spirit literally like rolls its eyes at me like, are you really gonna waste this? So they were egging me on to get up and move around and sort of feel the music the way they were, because they were very in tune with the melodies of this song. And it was interesting. I'll go ahead and play the song so I can explain what they were doing. But the name of the song is The Conquest of Paradise, The Secrets of Life Mix. And I will bring the window up just so you can see it. So that's it right there. And let me see if I'm at the part where they kind of came in. It was roughly about right here. Now, so I probably shouldn't have jolted it off like that so quickly, but there's a part in the background that is just a simple synth melody that's very subtle. It's not at the forefront, and it kind of like swings up and down in pitch. It's like, and like every time it would do that, the main guy with the wings, like we'll just say he was the middle one of the 3 to 5 guys, he was kind of like would symbolically flap the costume wings, like these up here in the top left, and he would kind of like, but they were actually flying. That's what was goofy about it. They were like hovering in this celestial space that I was also in, and kind of running, hopping, and then they would hover and like flap the wings really slow and symbolic. But each time the notes of the song would pitch bend up, he would hover up, and then he would kind of slowly come back down as the melody toned back down, and then when it would go up, he would go up again. And it was very playful. And what's funny about it is like, it was like they were inviting me on this extremely serious journey, but they were being super playful, and they were unconcerned with me and whether or not I was saying yes or no. And I actually was trying, because I could feel the trip was coming on so fast and strong, I was rushing to try and get everything set up for something sexual that I wanted to do. Like, I'm very experimental and weird with stuff like that. Like, I love exploring the self and having like a masculine and a feminine side. I'll explore both sides at some point in some way. And so I was kind of like rushing, trying to make something happen there. And they weren't berating me. Like, they weren't saying like, no, you fucking idiot, don't do that. But they were kind of like, come on, like, you're wasting time. Like, let's go. Like, they were being very playful but egging me on, and I didn't feel like dancing or getting up because I felt very heavy. And so I was kind of just laying there on my side like, oh my god, this is insane. Like, the things I could see already, I was like, this is going to be intense, I can already tell. And so I was like, no, I can't get up and dance, but I sort of mentally agreed to go along with whatever they had to show me or teach me. But because I wasn't getting up, they were still kind of like, at least move, like move. I just felt this urge to move, so I'm like squirming around sideways, like dancing while laying down is the best way I could describe it. And it did feel better. It helped my body process all the digesting of the mushrooms a little bit. It just kind of helped in some way. But right about then was when I started seeing more of this, the cinders kind of blasting off me as this heat was hitting me. To me, I labeled it in this layer as burning off the impure, because it felt like what was happening was a lot of things that had built up in me were being burned off spiritually, like in this celestial plane. And even though I didn't necessarily feel physical heat, it was like some sort of burning, like purification by this bright orangish light, like a celestial fire or something. But anyways, after they did that and I kind of somewhat agreed, very briefly I started seeing faces close up that were very abstract, like just dots that they were all forming this fractalized face. And they, like, out of the dots I started seeing patterns and I started to see a face. It was actually 3 faces. So this was the best I could create with AI to resemble them. The top ones are sort of how their actual shape would be, but the bottom ones are more like what I saw. So I could see these points that were very abstract, and I could make out a 3D shape out of those points, and the 3D shape looked more like what these are up here, like slightly more somewhere between a human and like some sort of goofy goblin or gnome or elf. Which is funny because, people that talk about DMT and Terrence McKenna fans always talk about machine elves, and all that shit. But these were more, to me, I labeled these as mushroom spirits, like the spirit of the mushrooms. It felt very, I don't know how to describe it, like abstract and not necessarily human, but friendly for the most part. And it was so brief. Like, I saw that for only about 30 seconds, and they were really close to me too, like in my face, like they were watching over me. But I will say the Native American eagle guys felt very real. Like, I've never had entities look so crisp and real, and so like communicate so clearly to me and allow me to say something back and respond. It was like, I've never had that. I've had vague entities that were like fractal beings in a weird 4D looking realm of geometric imagery, but this was like different. I can't even describe it. It was like hyper realistic, and it was like in a 3D space in the spiritual realm or in my mind. But yeah, so the mushroom looking, or the fractal looking little goblin guys, they didn't last long. But I heard someone, it was like a shaman, I don't remember the wording, but he basically worded a phrase like something was wrong in me, that I had built up or held in a lot of pain, and that it needed to be removed, basically. And that it seemed to be referring to that burning light that I was talking about earlier. Part of that was the beginning of it, and then what he started doing was blowing some sort of smoke out and fanning it with feathers onto me. I tried to render, these are all AI also that I tried to render. Like, I kept typing all these different ways of what I experienced. Unfortunately, the AI kept putting headdresses on them because it thinks anytime you say Native American or shaman that they have to have a headdress. This guy didn't have feathers up off of his head. I think he may have had things hanging down, and he seemed to have long hair that was tied back. I couldn't see him clearly because he was more etheric, like the eagle guys, like sort of a glowing orange, almost like outlines, like this bottom right image. But the way he was positioned was sort of like the top right image. He was over me, kneeled next to me, blowing smoke and fanning smoke at me, and I could almost feel the heat of it hitting me. It was like this gentle warmth. He didn't say much after he said the initial thing about me needing to be kind of taken care of or whatever, but all of these images sort of capture bits of what it looked like and felt like. I think the bottom left one is basically how I was laying, and the way the heat is coming off the body, like hitting it but bouncing off. That's sort of how, vaguely how it was when I first saw those streams of light. But yeah, it was very celestial, like I was just in a void in space. It was definitely like an alternate realm that was superimposed over where, you know, I was laying in my bed. And it would be like, even if I closed my eyes, of course I could see it extremely vividly, but even with my eyes open, I could witness the fact that I was in my bed while simultaneously seeing all this other stuff going on. It was like having dual screens or dual monitors and watching both at the same time. That's the best way I could describe it. But there was a point where, now this, I have an ex-partner. She appeared over a glowing, we're still in the big void, it's like celestial void, but she appeared with like molten or glowing light below her, like almost like a sphere of light. So these two images that have the stars and the crawling looking girl, I tried to get AI to render what I saw, and I just couldn't. It doesn't understand what the heck I'm trying to say. This one's disturbing, but what I was typing was girl with curved ram horns or curved horns on her head, because my partner or ex-partner appeared with like curved horns, very much like a succubus type, kind of like this anime character. That was the closest thing I could find, just not curved as much, like not a full loop like that. But anyways, I think the reason was because I kind of saw her as a succubus type figure when I was with her at times. She had a sexual side and was a sex worker, so it was kind of like the way it appeared in this vision, it was like she was a trickster and being represented that way, and that it was like her spirit was telling me that that served a purpose, like she led me down a spiritual path, and it was like bait. I always talk about spiritual bait, like you'll get lured in by things that seem toxic or bad or, you know, addictive or sexual or whatever, and it's like the universe is luring you towards the right path. So I kind of feel like the image of her as this sexual succubus luring me was meant to say that, but I'm not sure because something very dark happened right after this. So anyways, she's crawling over this ball or circle of like molten light is how I would describe it. And she was crawling away from me with this type. I left this image in here. Oops, I didn't mean to click there, dang it. I left this image in here because the bodysuit she had on was more like this. Like it leaves the butt and the legs exposed. But she looked more like this bodysuit with these horns and in a crawling position, crawling away and looking back, smiling like the girl in the bottom left. Like she looked back at me and smirked and then crawled on. And the imagery basically represented like her teasing and luring me, like come follow me is what it was saying. Like it was like a seduction thing. But when she started crawling, she kind of morphed in and out of the light before changing. Like at some point she was close up and facing me and saying something, but it was everything in these images kind of morphs in and out of being. If you've ever seen AI videos, the way weird things that look realistic kind of morph in and out of each other because AI doesn't know how to show realistic movement and stuff. It was like that, only ultra high resolution. So it didn't look as fake as that. It looks weird, like literal magic, like morphing in and out of light and out of physical objects, like that kind of thing. After she kind of crawled off, there was this, it really wasn't a voice. It was almost like telepathic, like something without speaking was saying words to me. And I could hear them without hearing them. In other words, telepathically, I just knew what it wanted or was saying. And when it was, this is where things got dark and weird. And I've had things like this happen on psychedelics before, but not on this scale. So basically, this voice started saying or implying telepathically that Earth is a prison and that I'm doomed to repeat, well, to not only continue this sort of repetitive life, locked in sort of enslavement, just working to no end and moving on towards, you know, death at some point. It basically said I'd be trapped here forever doing that, and if I die, I'm just reborn and we'll do it again. And it was implying that if I it specifically was targeting my cat, which I love unconditionally to the end of the earth. Like I would take a bullet for my cat probably. It was starting to imply without, like I said, this is a weird telepathic vibe, that if I sacrificed him, I would then have the dream life that I wanted and also escape this prison. So it was almost like I would, and the way that it was explaining this was, it was trying to make it make sense. Like, you know, when people say make it make sense, this sort of dark voice or dark thing was implying that what would happen if I did something violent that was a sacrifice like that, was that it would somehow benefit me, but I would have to go through a bunch of suffering first. Like I would have there would be consequences for doing that, and that there would be a reward for suffering all those consequences. and it was almost implying like I would be known for what I did, and like publicly shamed and hated. So in other words, it was like saying, you should do this bad thing, you will be completely hated and punished, and you will suffer for that bad thing, and at the end of like a lifetime of that suffering, you'll then be free and you'll have everything you ever wanted. And I was like, I was trying to understand even why it would suggest it. Like, what is the purpose of this though? Like, why? And everything was so jumbled, there wasn't a clear answer. But at the end of the confusion and me kind of going back and forth trying to get a straight answer, or even a question I could respond to clearly, it eventually changed back from this darker vibe to the voice related to like the golden Native American people or the glowing people from earlier. And then they started implying it was just a test to see if I had it in my heart to be cruel, to be violent, and to sacrifice something to benefit myself. And I was like, but why would you tell me that this is an endless prison and that I would only escape if I harmed something I cared about, and also then suffered a lifetime? Like, all I could figure out is that the imagery they were sort of showing me during all this was that if I ever did something like that, there would be like massive lifetime consequences. Like, it wouldn't be just me harming something I cared about. It would be like I would literally, like, it was just this long timeline of like the worst possible things happening to me because of what I did. And so yeah, like, it was showing me that it was a sacrifice, but what I don't understand is the why. It seemed to be saying like, by going through that suffering now, you will dodge suffering later or something. But it still, even now, doesn't make sense. And it's hard for me to comprehend that a good being would even suggest that to me, even as a test. But the way it was wording it at the end of it all was, we already knew how you would answer. We already knew that you would never have that in your heart, but we had to show you that, or something. That's sort of what they were saying. After that, it started getting really, this was still in the dark phase of things. I was seeing a lot of death imagery and a lot of things about the darker things of the world. And that's when I took the opportunity to ask them, like, well, one, why the hell are you showing me all this? But two, what am I supposed to do about people suffering in other countries that I can't do anything about? And also people, just general suffering. I was like, why is there suffering? Because they seem to have knowledge or answers about all of that type of thing. But anyways, before I started asking those questions, some of the imagery, like when my ex morphed into the light that was glowing magma or something, there was like this onyx rock. It wasn't round like these images. Unfortunately, I couldn't get anything to render like it. It was more like a rough boulder shape, but a stone that you could hold like the size of a basketball, with rough faces and edges. But a black skull, like a deer skull or some sort of antlered animal skull, was morphing out of it, like merged with it, and kind of like melting in and out of it in 3D. I can't really explain it, but these were the closest images I could get, particularly these two on the right that don't have the square around them. I removed the background to make them look, and I actually superimposed a different one on this because it felt more accurate. But basically this rock and skull were all black. The antlers might have been more of a lighter, like a brown or something. But as it was rotating and morphing, I could see the skull coming out of it with kind of tendrils and stuff like this image here. And all these eyes were all over the stone and the skull, and they all were piercingly looking right at me, and there was no sound, but I felt this intense feeling of this thing could see right through me. Like it saw everything about me, the good and the bad, and there was no hiding. It was like the eye of Sauron, only it was like 400 eyes and they were all glowing red or orangish red, like just like the magma from earlier. There was a lot of orange imagery in this, like fire and magma, which is interesting to me because I don't really ever think about anything like that, so it was weird. But they were just the most piercing multitude of eyes, and this stone and this weird deer antlered thing just piercing at me. And as that was morphing and turning to face me and all the eyes were just at me, the horns started fractalizing. So they were like a repeating pattern of horns in this shape that was almost like some Asian buildings. Like I'm thinking both of Thailand, like temples in Thailand sometimes have this sort of fractalized art at the edges. It'll curve up and there's sort of a repeating pattern a little bit. But yeah, it was like that. It was like the antlers became this repeating fractal, like the top of a building or a roof. It's very hard to explain when I can't show you what it looked like. But that happened, and the imagery just kept morphing and changing. That's when I started asking them about death, and simultaneously they kind of gave me the answer while showing me imagery of people suffering, which it was really sad and depressing. There was a woman screaming in front of buildings. She didn't have these clothes on. She had just less covering, so she didn't look as conservative or covered up as this woman does, but her hands were up on her head like this, and she was wailing a lot. Like, this is actually a picture from the movie Hereditary, but the way the mom is screaming here was how this lady was screaming. And I also saw images of children screaming, like suffering. In my mind, I was thinking about people being buried alive after buildings are bombed. And I was asking the same voice that had just tested me or whatever. I was like, well, why is there all this suffering? Like, I don't understand. And if this is a prison for me or for others, like, I don't understand why some people, like, why am I living in relative comfort and the other people are suffering, like, intense pain, like, not even just starving and stuff, but physical torture and, you know, like intense, way beyond just being homeless. In other words, like, you know, more than that. And they basically, their wording was like, it's meant to be, everything has to balance. And these are people that actually, now this, a lot of people don't like this kind of mentality, and I'm not saying I agree with it. Because a lot of books that talk about manifestation will blame victims and say, well, this is what you must truly want. If it's happening to you, you're causing it. But it was kind of like that message. They were saying we should all be reverent because these people are making a sacrifice for us. So the implication was that spiritually, these souls chose that path as a sacrifice for the people who don't have to suffer. And at some point, like, those of us that are trying to spiritually improve will get to that level and we will make that sacrifice. That was kind of what they were implying. They were kind of saying there's always going to be evil or bad in the world, and to sort of negate that, people are making sacrifices. And it was just saying, like, because they're doing that, someone like me gets to have less suffering. Like, I still have suffered in my life, but nothing like that, nowhere even close. So it's like they were saying that all of us should be reverent and thank those people and basically be thankful. Like, it was very much like a martyrdom, you know, like a Christ imagery thing. They were basically saying all these people are doing that. They're sacrificing for everyone else. And it was almost like it was a choice. They never gave me a straight answer, though, on like, okay, well, why are children suffering? Are you saying their soul chose that ahead of time? I guess that's what they were saying. But that was kind of the message I was getting. The problem with these kinds of visions is it all fades quickly, so it's hard to remember. But I do remember that point very vividly, because I even started crying because I was like, I can't do anything about it. You know, it'll be hard for me to get through all of this without crying, but it's frustrating. It's frustrating because I think all of us want to do something, but our daily life really distracts from that, and we also can't. What are we gonna do from where we're at about certain things in the world? Even making change on our own soil is like a monumental thing because of the way the system is already rigged against us. And so I was just upset and saying to them, like, I'm just laying here in this cozy bed, like, what the fuck am I going to do? You know, like, I don't know what the path is. And they didn't really tell me personally what to do, but they just said you should be reverent because they're doing that for us, for everyone that's not suffering. And it kind of just, they showed me more. There was a lot of death imagery. Like I saw, you know, skulls everywhere at times, like morphing in and out of things. I saw some demonic imagery, kind of like earlier. The interesting thing is I'm so experienced with psychedelics that I've learned how fear works when you're on psychedelics. It can, if you let it, it will completely overpower you. And once you're experienced, you actually stop fearing darker imagery. Like, it's not like you're into it. You don't like darker imagery, but you no longer are afraid of it. Like, the stronger you spiritually become, it's like that light is with you wherever you walk. So you can walk right through hell and you're not afraid, basically. I think that's the best way to put it. So particularly in this trip, I was seeing a lot of dark and scary imagery, but none of it really fazed me, other than me feeling emotion for others and sad for others. But I was never afraid for myself, I guess is how I would say it. But yeah, so after this wailing lady, I saw more dark imagery and kind of like different large-scale deaths, like calamities and stuff, very vague imagery over long periods of time. Like, I think the message was just them saying, you know, it's a cycle, like these things are going to always be there until we completely fix everything, which seems like something that's not hardly possible. But the message was just like, don't worry about the size of all these, the scale of all these problems. It's just, you need to be thankful for what you have, basically. So at one point right after that, I had gone to take a bathroom break, and I was sitting on the toilet, and there's a towel hanging in my shower, and the towel was in a shape like a woman's hair. Like if someone had long hair and it kind of flares out at the bottom when it's hanging, like if their head's tilted. And this is, I looked up, and in my mind I saw this skeletal woman kind of peeking out of the shower with her hair hanging down, like just complete skeleton. And her hair was kind of like this on the right. And she was, obviously skeletons don't have eyes, but the eye sockets were like looking at me. but there was no movement. She was just like clinging to like something, and just, it was like there facing me. And after everything I had already witnessed during this part of the trip, I honestly wasn't scared at all. I felt like, the first thing I said was, geez. And then I was like, that's disturbing. In my mind I was like, oh. But I was also kind of laughing at it. because I was like, I've already just seen so much that this is nothing now. And I don't think in my mind I touched it or anything, but I had this sense of like, not reverence, but that's what was on my mind after everything before it. It was just more like compassion for this, whatever this was. It seemed like it was, at first it seemed like the intention was to scare me, or it was like death was looking at me, and I instead showed compassion in my mind. It felt like I was touching its cheek, but I didn't actually. Like, there was no image of that. It just felt emotionally like that's the level of compassion I had for it. And I was like, I'm not afraid of death. Like, so it doesn't repulse me, you know? It was like the weirdest thing. Like, it's so hard to explain if you haven't been there. But these images are pretty creepy. They're about what it looked like, or felt like in my mind, particularly the one on the right, but this left one kind of captures the way the hair was too. So I'll get rid of those so you guys don't have to have nightmare visions anymore, but I'll bring the Succubus girls back. But that was about when I went and laid back down and that's when I started thinking about all my exes and different connections with friends and family in the past and all the problems there, why things ended with different people and mistakes I made. And even with this particular ex that kept appearing, you know, like I had an interaction with her, and there was a lot of lessons there. I guess I don't want to draw the video out excessively talking about each and every one of those things, but it was sort of like when you have attachment issues, if you know about attachment styles, you know, I was looking back over all these connections and seeing what happened, because back in the time that it did happen, I couldn't understand what was going on or the dynamic between me and all these different partners. And now I do understand it and have compassion for them and their mental state at the time. So there was a moment like that. When I first moved, I had hung out with someone, and when I first got here, I was hypersexual because COVID had just happened and the lockdown was kind of slowly unlocking and public meetings were happening again. And I went on a date. I remember the first date I went on, we met at a park just to make sure we weren't crazy or whatever. And then a few days later we met at a bar, and of course we wound up going home with each other that night and doing every possible thing you could with two bodies. And I just remember, you know, that wasn't always, I'm not always like that, but I think it was because of COVID, the isolation of an entire year before that. But I kind of brought that energy with me into every connection after that. Like, I was hypersexual for a long time after that. I think it's important to also point out that around that time, I was just on the verge of kind of exploring spirituality and evolving out of how I had been prior to that. And so also around that time, that hypersexuality, it would cause me to ruin potential friendships. Like, I would meet someone that I felt like I would have a good connection with, and I at the very least envisioned a strong friendship that could potentially develop into more later, and I would ruin it like right off the bat because of the hypersexuality and sort of getting in touch with my body. Like, I was just starting to learn about things like even basic yoga and things that would sort of awaken your body and the senses. And so sensuality it's always been a way I connected with people, but this was like a resurgence of that. And so I think I was rushing to share too much with people too soon and trying to connect sexually like right off the bat, day one, because to me, I had experienced such a deep, like several deep moments with people like that. And I think I was trying to recreate those, and I was rushing to recreate them. So it's taken me a long time to understand that just never will work, and to become more still and more peaceful. And I think during this trip, those topics were kind of I was being reminded of all that again and refreshed on it in a way. Only in the last few years, last couple years, as I healed a lot of other spiritual and inner child stuff, that kind of toned down a little bit. But stuff like that around that time was a pattern. So I was going over all that during the tail end of this trip, and thinking about all these people I've known and connections that went good or bad or whatever. And I just had all this compassion for everyone. Like, I was less concerned with me. Hello, I am dropping in during editing, like a day after I made the video. And I realized I totally left out one of the most emotional and important parts of the whole thing. Which was right after the part I just described, where I was thinking about different connections I've had in my lifetime. Kind of in the middle of all that, I was like talking about or to one person in particular, and I was kind of crying out loud about it, because it was almost like I was having a dialogue with something else, like with spirit or something. With my higher self, I guess I would describe it as, about these people and my connection with them. And this has happened twice before, but my cat, basically, he'll come up if I'm having sort of a very vocal, emotional moment on psychedelics. He will come out of nowhere. Like, he just shows up on the bed with me, and he will hug my arm with two paws over the arm, like this. And he'll pull up as tight as he can against my body. Like, it's the sweetest thing. But he did that. I tried to find images that are similar to it, but I couldn't really find anything exactly like what he does. But he balls up and uses his paws on the edge of my arm to like pull up against me. And he'll be there for me, basically. And that will just make me cry more. Like, I'll sit there and talk to him and tell him I'm sorry for, not giving him enough attention, and how thankful I am for him to have been with me through this part of my life and all that. And like, he did that during this trip, during some of the peak emotional moments. And I was just so happy. Like, you can't see him. Well, yeah, you can kind of see him. He's in my lap right now. Look at him. He's so funny. But yeah, I was just bawling my eyes out because of that. But he was very sweet, and he seems to know when I'm feeling deep emotional things. He just, even if I wasn't making sound, it's like he senses it. So in a way, to me, he's like a spiritual being. Like, he's important to me. And that's why that disturbing event earlier in the trip, where it was suggested that I should somehow sacrifice him out of my life, I was like, why would a spiritual being say that to me? But if it was a test, I mean, it makes sense. It was like the most brutal test they could give me. But it's just like, of course I wouldn't do that. So I don't know. But yeah, I just wanted to come in and mention this. I'm trying to think if there was anything else I left out of the video. Like, a lot of the family stuff I left out because it wouldn't matter to strangers as part of a trip report. But there was a lot of deep things. Like, I'm very detached from all of my family except maybe my sister. I kind of have become the isolated child, and I'm just detached from all emotion when it comes to them. So a lot of that was coming up in this trip. And for people that are afraid to face things like that, that would be scary, but it's very good the way this substance, this particular species of mushroom, kind of gets you to view things and look at things. Now, on Psilocybe cubensis, I always go over these same things, so I'm not saying this particular species is better than the other for that. I'm not really afraid of emotions. I will delve into the trip, and when the emotions come up, I just have learned to totally let them flow, because that's the most healing thing you can do. But I just wanted to mention that also, because I left most of that out because I feel like it's kind of boring for people to listen to someone else's family problems. But maybe it's helpful for others to understand, like, we all have these dysfunctional things, you know, in our family lives, and maybe it helps to understand how a trip would force you to deal with those, or at least go over those things in your head. But yeah, nothing too traumatic happened with that. I got, you know, teary-eyed a few times, but I also was kind of just like rolling my eyes, frustrated, because the spirit, or the golden eagle entities, voices or whatever, it kept pressuring me a little bit about the family stuff, saying like, you're gonna have to be the one, because no one else in your family is gonna bring all this up. It was basically saying, I'm gonna have to be the one to connect with my brother, I'm gonna have to be the one to point out what my father has done, and I'm gonna have to be the one to go to my mother. And I was having images or stories in my head of me healing them, even so far as getting them to take these substances willingly, not unwillingly, but getting them to do that as part of their healing, because the trauma is so deep. Like, my mother had an extremely traumatic childhood, which is why she was drawn to someone like my father. I'm going too far into the psychology, but you have to understand these cycles are very deep and generational, and psychedelics are probably the one thing that can break through that without years and years and years of work. You're still going to have to do years of work, but the mushrooms will crack you open like in one night and start you on that journey much quicker than you trying to just, most likely you're going to be running from it your whole life if you don't do something drastic like that. So there's a huge benefit to them there, and I wish I could convey to people that it's not scary to face those things. And that's what the psychedelics will show you, is that it actually is not something to be afraid of. As soon as you face what you were running from, you realize how little there is to fear there. But yeah, I just wanted to mention the cat thing, because it was like, every time I even think about it after that, I get all emotional. But yeah, he's the sweetest. The weird thing is, he has different personalities at different times. And it was like, when I'm in a spiritual mindset like that, suddenly he becomes like this spirit animal or guide that's there with me. But outside of that, he's just like a dumbass. So it's really funny, like, when weird how that happens. I don't know what that means really, but I just thought it's an important part of the experience. But anyway, so back to the regular video. But the presence of the entity was mostly gone during all that. It was just me caring about other people and thinking about other people, and just being sad that they go through life alone because they choose to, and just wishing like that they knew people are out there that they could reach out to, or that would, I don't know. It was like, I think what the point of this was, it was a mirror of myself, because I do the same thing. I won't reach out to anyone. I'll sit there and struggle, whether it's a financial issue I need help with, or, you know, I'm just emotionally, stubbornly being like isolated and hyper independent. It was like I was being shown all these aspects of myself through all these other people and their various traits. And that was when I started grasping what I was being shown in that way too. Like, if you pay attention to all this stuff, like the suffering from earlier, and all these partners, and just various elements of this story that played out, the ultimate message of the entire trip was the classic psychedelic message that we're all one. Or you could also say everything's a projection coming from me out. and then everyone out there, like I'm part of their projection. So everyone's kind of like this network of projections, but the overall message was like, all these people I've had interactions with, they're a mirror of things within me. Like I even had visions of my enemies during this time, like people who used to be so mean, like stalked me. When I lived in Dallas and Fort Worth, I actually sold a house because I was being stalked so bad. Like I literally had to run away, you know, like running for my life because I thought I was literally going to get murdered. The things they were doing. And like those people still exist. They're still around and they're still living happy lives where I came from before I moved to where I'm at now. And it was like I was being shown that even those people and all the darkness within them was a reflection that I was supposed to learn from. And I was like, I finally accepted during all this that, okay, I accept it. Like they existed for a reason. They did what they did for a reason, and it caused me to go on the path that I'm on. And I was just like finally kind of understanding all that at the end of it. I don't remember how the wind down at the end of the trip was after that. I was mostly just listening to the playlist I have and thinking about different people. A lot of the songs were reminding me of people, but yeah, it just kind of tapered off, and I was struggling to go to sleep at the end because these definitely keep you awake. Another thing I meant to say at the beginning, I would compare these way more to like an LSD trip than a mushroom trip, as far as they just keep your mind very active and awake. And early on, they also make you want to move a lot, so they're almost like a stimulant. I would say there's an element of like, I gotta move, like you want to get up and dance or something. That's why those spirits were telling me to move. But it's not an intense level of that. I'm not a fan of stimulants. I don't like my heart racing and stuff, but there is a hint of that type of energy early on, but it kind of fades away. But yeah, when you're trying to go to sleep at the end of this all, it's very hard to go to sleep. I wound up taking a dream herb I have and blue lotus extract that I have, hoping that would, if it didn't knock me out, I was hoping it would at least give me nice visuals and relax me. It didn't seem to do anything noticeable to me. And then I ate heavy food. I think I ate garlic bread because carbs are supposed to make you sleepy, I think. So I ate that and something else, and that eventually I fell asleep. But yeah, so the bulk of the trip story ends there. But I think the overall takeaway was the interconnectedness of everyone. But on a personal level for me, it was showing me that everything outside of me does have something to do with me. And at one point when I was stressing about the state of the world and all that, I was kind of stressing about the upcoming election and like, are we going to end up under a totalitarian regime? If I was just kind of lost on what am I going to do about that? And during that phase of the trip, the voice was there again, and it sort of said, you need to, it didn't say this out loud. Remember, everything's kind of just like a feeling that's telepathically sent to me, but it was kind of giving me the sense that because everything is literally, you're projecting how you feel, and a lot of this is, if it's not just straight up to teach you something, it's something that you're wanting or causing by your own desire, whether it's conscious or not. And so while being concerned about that inner voice or outer voice kind of convinced me that I need to just remember that everything's going to turn out the way that I need it to, and whatever happens, it was giving me the sense that I could somewhat influence what happens. In other words, do I really want that? Like, do I want to suffer through some dictatorship? Will that somehow grow me as a person, as a soul, not a person but a soul? Like, is there a purpose to it? And I just eventually said, I don't think that's what I or anyone else wants. I don't think any of us need that to make the world better. I think we can make the world better without the suffering through that. And I think if people don't go that route, we will suffer. It'll be the only way to show us how bad it could be, for us to turn it around after what, decades of suffering. Who knows how long it would last. Once that power is taken, it would be very hard to take it back. And so the message there was kind of like, we don't have to go down that path, but it's still there as a potential trajectory. But I felt a lot more relaxed about it by the end of it. I felt like deep down it's not what I want, so I don't think it's going to be my reality. Like, I'm not gonna, I don't know, I just felt relief by the end of it. But that was one concern that popped up during the trip. But yeah, I'm leaving out a lot of the imagery. I wish I could remember a lot of it. There was definitely lots of death imagery, but I wasn't very scared overall once I got used to the fact that it was going to keep showing up. There is some trickster energy in this. Like, even when I saw this ex crawling and looking back, teasing me like in a sexual way and trying to get me to follow her, her energy felt very trickster. And in metaphysics, tricksters they're not necessarily bad or good, but they can lead you to bad. So it's like they're that's why they're a trickster. You don't really know what their motive is, and it's not always going to benefit you to interact with them. So there were elements in the trip that weren't benevolent and good, but I will say that the eagle men at the beginning seemed very good. The interesting thing about them too was that their energy was very masculine. They were like warriors. They were, cut or built really strong, but they weren't toxically masculine. Like, they were just chill, and they were like, come on, come fly with us, come dance. And they weren't like, come on, you fucking pussy. They were very gentle and playful, and but they had total confidence too. It was like, to me, that's what true masculinity should be. And for me, because I'm very fluid with my gender, especially on psychedelics, not necessarily how I present, but mentally, my gender can be very fluid. Like, I've experienced myself split into a male and female side in my mind before. And so I was kind of not questioning, but wondering how they were towards someone like that, who's a male but has feminine traits in their spirit. And they seemed indifferent. They didn't seem to care. They were like, that doesn't matter to us. Like, we don't care how you express yourself, like how you express your spirit. But regardless, they wanted me to go with them. And the vibe was, at least during that time, I would be one of the boys. Like, this journey was kind of a tough journey, and it required somewhat of a warrior spirit to be willing to do it. So when I did go, it wasn't a very firm yes. It was kind of like, I guess I'll go. I don't know what you guys are plotting. But overall, I think I should end it by just saying a key thing that I noticed during this is that spirits and entities speak in emotion. They may use words occasionally, like that you hear, but in general, the words are more like telepathic images and feelings. And you just interpret that into a sentence. Like, you interpret what they're saying by what they're showing you or making you feel. So it's like in the metaphysical realm, or in the magical realm, however you want to put it, the language is emotions, which is interesting to me because I know a lot of people that are into spiritual things, but they're more intellectual, and they kind of deaden their emotions because of the way they grew up. And that makes me wonder, like, if they did this, would the entities that they encounter, which are kind of like inner parts of themselves, really, would that crack their emotions open? Would it help them heal? Or would their mind invent a way to continue avoiding the emotions? I'm very curious about that, because for me, I used to be kind of closed off like that, and as soon as I started using psychedelics, my heart kind of started breaking open over time, more and more every time. And this, I would say, was like a pretty big culmination of that. Like, this was the pinnacle so far of what I've experienced. I will say that I just cried a lot during it, and I had read that for a lot of people, when they take Natalensis, they don't cry much, whereas when people take cubensis, they always get emotional. It's just like, seems to be a common theme on that. So I expected this to be like this dreamy, fun. People described it as feminine too, which is weird. They said they felt like cubensis was masculine and Natalensis was feminine. But the funny thing is, when I took this, it was male warriors who came to me. And all the spirits I met were male, other than my exes, who, you know, the one ex appeared multiple times and was like a succubus, a female demon, basically, sexual demon. So I don't really understand that, because everyone said it would be feminine. I think it may have been the dosage. I only took 1.75 grams. That is not a lot compared, well, if you're talking about cubensis, but with Natalensis, it's a lot. I would advise a newcomer to take less, like 1 gram or less for their first try, because you need to get familiar with the potency of these. I think ultimately it wasn't like super dangerous, but it was close. I don't know that I should have been alone if I had taken even a little bit more, especially when I had that whole sacrifice thing come up. If it had been someone mentally unstable, I think that would be dangerous. For me, I know how to talk back to a suggestion like that in my mind. Like, I basically said that, well, that's just not me. Like, I can't do that. So if I'm going to be on this prison earth cycle forever, just because I won't make a sacrifice of a life, then I was like, then I guess I'll be here forever. Like, I literally was just refusing. Like, you're not going to, because they were showing, like, I was being shown images of this like monetarily successful life, like success, wealth, you know, everything I could ever want on the physical plane, and on top of that, being told I would escape this spiritual prison forever, like this earthly prison that your spirit is trapped on. So I was like promised so much and shown all this beautiful imagery, which to me was suspicious. It was like, that's a little too good to be true, I think, you know. But yeah, it was freaky. I keep going in loops because my mind's just going over the whole trip again, but I'll go ahead and end it soon. But yeah, it's just, hopefully this gives a really in-depth look to people at like how bizarre but also how profound Natalensis can be. And as I do more experimentation with it, I'll always make new videos about it if it's anything crazy like this. But yeah, I would suggest being careful with it. It's not like cubensis at all. So even if you're experienced with that, be careful with this. Kind of test it out on a, you know, more manageable dose before you go above like 1.5, I would say, on the grams. But I guess that's it. If you guys have any questions about any of the crazy shit I said, you can put them in the comments, or if you have your own experience, you definitely write it in the comments, because I'm curious how you guys that have tried it would compare it to like cubensis or other experiences. The next one I'm going to try is a species called Pans cyans, specifically a strain of that called TTBVI, which I forget what the TT stands for, but BVI is British Virgin Islands, so that's the origin of it, I think. But it is one of the most potent mushrooms in the world right now. So it's like Natalensis is 2 times what cubensis is. Well, TTBVI is about 3 times. So you have to be even more careful with it. Like 1 gram of it is worth 3 grams of cubensis. So I'm going to be extremely careful with it. But that will be probably the next thing I review. We'll see. I will review the other one in the near future, hopefully. And for now, I'll let you guys go. I want to make this channel kind of vibrant again and bring it back to life. So go ahead, like and subscribe, click the alert bell so you know when I post new videos, and we can get this thing alive again. And hopefully I can give you guys some good stories. So I will see you later for now. Love all of you, and bye-bye.